few seconds delay before we actually get going. Okay, so still, I don't see either of you. I see me, I can hear both of you, can't see either one of you. I'm also hearing an echo. Okay. Awesome. Well, we'll still play around a little bit with the video to see if we can actually get Kindle and Cinda to be visible on here, but as long as you can hear them, you'll get the content. Um, and let us start by apologizing to Richard. I'm sorry. I don't know how you got into our call. I apologize for having to kick you off, but hopefully you're still watching and or listening. If anyone knows what we need to do to get Kindle and Cinda visible, or if you can tell me that they are visible, that I'm the only one that can't see them, that would be great. Uh, we're getting ready to get to that. So let's introduce ourselves. Yes, I did. Now it's got a hi. So while we continue to mess with this, go ahead and let's introduce ourselves. Cinda, we'll start with you, please. Among many reasons. All right, and Kendall, please introduce yourself. Woohoo! Excellent. And as for myself, I am Michael. I'm part of the duo that hosts the RPG Academy podcast. We also do a lot of variety of shows, including actual plays, interviews, and GM theory and advice. And we also host our own convention called a Catacon. And that's actually, yes, that makes sense because I can only see me. Stand by. Stand by. Dun, dun, dun. So, hold on. I need stand by, everybody. Stand by. I'm going to send the link that Richard used to get in because apparently that's the one you need to both of you on Slack channel. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah, I didn't do that either. I complete and Kendall, you were saying we were good at this. Uh, I haven't got my window open there. Okay. I I am recording, or I'm ready to record. So 4, 3, 2, 1, and record. And I have an error. Hold on. Holy camoles, Batman. This is why we don't do this, people. I'm so sorry. One more time. 4, 3, 2, 1, and record. This is Michael, and I am now recording. Yeah, try that. Should be in the Slack online panel channel. Oh, I see a Kindle. Hello. Oh, and maybe look at that.
There it
There we are.
Only took us 6 minutes. That's probably a new record. Awesome. Well, let's start over, and we will edit all that out for the podcast version. Live viewers, sorry. But let's do introductions. Senda, I will start with you.
Okay. Hi guys. I am Senda from She's a Super Geek on the RPG Academy Network. We are an actual play podcast that highlights women as GMs. I also do another podcast on a different network called Pandas Talking Games, where we talk about gaming questions and problems from the perspective of one-shots and campaigns. And I talk about one-shots because I run a lot of them. And I write for Gnome Stew. So hopefully that's a good resume.
You're very busy.
Both of us. Yeah, you've got me and Kendall both beat, so yeah.
Definitely.
All right, Kendall, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kendall with the, I was going to say, the RPG Academy podcast. That's not me, that's you. It's right in front of me. I should learn how to be better on these live things. Let's try this again. I'm Kendall, and I'm with the Redemption podcast. We're a Star Wars actual play podcast that you too can hear on the RPG Academy Network. The reason I'm here is I've been running con games mostly for Catalyst for their demo team for Shadowrun since about 2005. Also did some work with Pelgrane Press for their 13th Age line when they launched and helped them along. And lately just been kind of running my own games going at cons. So.
Well, thank you both for being here. As for myself, my name is Michael. I'm one of the duo of the RPG Academy podcast. We do a lot of different shows, including actual plays, long form, short form, GM theory advice, interviews, and more. We also host our own convention called a Catacon, which just happens to be around the corner, which is where this came from. One of our listeners and longtime listeners who's also coming to a Catacon was asking for some advice because I believe this is the first time he will be running a game at a convention. So I thought, why not get some people who actually know what they're doing, and I'll just kind of sit here and listen.
But instead, he found us. So.
Hey, I don't know about you. I know what I'm doing, or at least I'm really good at faking it now.
That makes one of us. All right, so Kendall will be manning the chat room for us because I'm not smart enough to figure out how to do that. So if you have any questions for us, please don't hesitate to jump them in there. We kind of have a loose outline of how we're going to approach this topic, but we can take questions if they make sense at the time, or we can hold them to the end. And this will run for probably as long as it needs to, but I would say 2 hours at max, and I kind of doubt we'll get there. So I want to start with talking about how you prepare for a one-shot game compared to like a campaign or even just a game with your home group when you're playing with people that you don't know. So again, Senda, you being kind of the resident expert, we'll start with you.
Well, now I've made myself sound like an expert. Yeah, go for it.
So when you're starting the process of preparing or writing what will eventually be a one-shot game for a convention, do you approach that any differently than you do for a game that you would run normally or with people that you know? And if so, kind of expound on that a little bit.
I usually try to be slightly more prepared. It doesn't always happen. The interesting thing for me is that most of my gaming at this point is happening in situations where it is recorded and I am playing with people that I don't know. So I basically just run like that all the time. I would say it's a little bit more relaxing when I know people, when I know who's going to be sitting down at my table. The other thing that I tend to do, and this is just me personally because it's my style of game that I like to play and that I like to run, is that I choose a lot of games that require very little traditional prep work. They might require work in terms of thinking about how to handle a setting or a basic premise to start from, something along those lines. But I'm really not doing any sort of linear story planning. It's just not how one-shots function for me. And in fact, I'm really bad at running modules generally, so I can't write them as modules for myself. So I basically am what's my first scene? Okay, and then we're going to just go from there and I'll see what happens. And that tends to be the kind of GM I am, whether I'm running at a convention or at home. But I also don't run for particular companies like Kendall has done.
And I do think that brings up a good a good point we need to cover is that if you're going to run a one shot that is very improvisational based, that's different than if you're running like a one shot that you have a limited time and there's sort of plot points that you need to hit. So we may circle back around to that specifically, but I'll move over to you, Kendall. Sort of the same sort of question. When you're preparing a game for a convention versus home play, is there a difference to that in how you prepare the writing or the module itself?
I know we were going to circle back around to this, but again, it really depends on what you're doing. Running for Catalyst, there's usually a couple different ways. There's Shadowrun missions, there's modules for the conventions. Sometimes there's the tournament modules, which are even more crazy, where it's kind of a torture to the GM session because we get those the night before usually, and we've never seen them before. And we have to run 2 consecutive nights with 2 different tables and have to grade them, and it's nuts. But when I run normal games, I do a little bit like Senda does, but I have I try and do a 3-act write-up. Okay, they're going to start here. This is where we need to be when there's going to be a twist, and this is where they need to be at the end, and it's up to the players to figure out how to get from point A to point B to point C.
Okay, I'm muting myself occasionally because my kids are upstairs making a lot of noise, so sorry about that. So for me, again, I'm by far the least experienced of the 3 of us in running convention games. I've started to get a lot more experience recently. I've also started, obviously to play more now that I'm going to conventions. I tend to run games that do have more of a story and a plot. I'm not afraid to jump off of those if I need to, but I'd usually come to the table with something. And the things that I've found that are different for a convention game versus home game is that you need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end for a limited amount of play. In my home game, I don't know how much that's bleeding through. I'm sorry. You can just kind of keep going. You're going to stop at 10 o'clock and then pick it up the next week. You try to get to a good cliffhangery type spot. But when you have 3, 4, maybe 5 hours total to give someone an experience, you need to have some sort of conclusion. If you're going totally improv, you can just you can work that in. If you're good at improv, you'll get there. But if you're running a module, you need to make sure that you're aware of your pacing. So you need to have a good opening scene, you need to have a good middle and a good end, as Kendall was saying. And I think the biggest thing I would suggest is make sure that you have modular encounters so that if you're going kind of slow, you can cut one out and it doesn't really affect the story. If people are just burning through things, then you can add a couple more in so that you don't end too early. So as you're preparing your adventure, kind of write out, this is what I think will take about an hour, this is what I think will take about an hour, and this is what I think take about an hour, and have 1 or 2 modular encounters within each of those hour blocks that can be dropped in or pulled out as appropriate.
You hit 2 very, very important things in my book. The first is you got to have an end. We were just at Origins this year. It wasn't any of the games you were around for, but I played in one game, not even going to mention the system or anything, but the game was very free form and kind of open, and at the end of it, there was this huge cliffhanger. And it's like, to be continued next year. It's like, wait a minute, what if I'm not going to be here next year? I have no idea who you are. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get in your game. So you're now going to leave me hanging. I don't know how the story resolves. And I felt like, okay, this is a pretty good game, but now you've cheated me out of an ending. So, because it wasn't advertised as like an ongoing game. So that was one of the big things. And the other one is watch your time and prep your time. The first thing I do if I'm running up my own module is I'll write down those things, and then I'll take my Thursday night gaming group, because we've been playing every Thursday night for like 5 years, and I will run them through it because I know they will beat the hell out of everything I can think of. And if they, like the Star Wars game I ran at a recent convention, I thought I had 4 hours of material. They blasted through it in an hour and a half.
Wow.
So I really had to expand that.
Yeah. Which, so the fun thing about playing games that are a little bit more improv intensive is that it's easier to kind of flex them on the back end to accommodate that kind of thing. And there's some interesting things you can do with how you involve the players in your story, specifically in terms of kind of how you ask the questions themselves that you're doing. Like I can ask you, hey, tell me about this room, and I can see like what I get out of you, and like it just is an open invitation for everybody to jump in and like let's have a conversation about it and build some story, build some world. But if I'm getting into more of a hurry, then I can say really, I can use much more leading questions to get a very specific answer quickly and still keep my players involved, and it pushes the plot along faster. So like, why is this room on fire is very different than tell me about this room, right? Like it's, you know, so it's, you know, just a little thing that I throw out there as like because I don't actually plan things, like I have a direction that I know things are probably going to go, but if it doesn't, that's fine. Like we're going to find an end. But how to kind of control the flex, the ebb and flow of the game in that conversation that I'm having with my players. That's my version. That's the improv version.
Okay. So one of the things that I've also noticed is, especially if you're going to an actual convention, like where you're scheduling an event, making sure that the description that you're providing matches the experience you plan on giving. I know that's coming through. And
just a little.
and also that you're asking for what you want. If you are going to run a very strategic and tactical type game, that needs to be in the description so that you don't get people there who think they're going to just do 4 hours of role play. I'm usually the other way around. I'll tell people this is a low combat, high role play type of experience. So I get people that are going to sign up that want that type of experience. And also if there's an age limit, you know, some of the games I run have adult themes. They're not graphic necessarily in nature, but we talk about, you know, bad things happen to good people. I don't know that I could run some of those games for a 10-year-old without, you know, massively changing what I'm doing, which might throw me for a loop in the moment. So just make sure that your descriptions are accurate to what you want to do and what you're trying to do with your players.
So creating a good description of your game is also how you're setting player expectations at your table. So when someone comes and sits down at your table, you're all on the same page to start, and you can avoid things like problem players and people who might not have anticipated what they're getting, and all kinds of stuff that can, you know, make problems at your table by having a good description. Like, if you're running something that's magical girls, just make sure you tell everybody it's magical girls. Not that happens a lot at my table.
Actually, everything should be. No,
definitely one last job.
You've got a good point there. Although, to play devil's advocate, if you put a description out there that says you're going to hit things with swords, people will come to your table with really low expectations. Then you can wow them with your great role-playing skills. Makes you look awesome.
There is that.
That still sets an expectation, though. Like, that still conveys something to me about your game.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, I can find something else to do that time slot. Okay.
Potentially. All right, so let's talk a little bit about choice of game. Now, if you're running for a company, you're pretty much locked into the game they want you to run. But if you're just running a game for fun or for other reasons, which we can also talk about the reasons why you'd run a game, you know, what sort of choices do you make? Why do you choose the game that you choose? Since Kendall, you're already up on my screen, we'll start with you this time.
For me, lately, I mean, the last convention I ran at was Grand Con last month, and I ran Star Wars because that's really where a lot of my focus is. Hello, podcast. So my world kind of revolves around that, but I also have a couple other games. I mean, I can run D&D. I can run Pathfinder. I can run my other current favorite game, Feng Shui. As you well know, because Michael actually got into a completely unplanned and unexpected Feng Shui game with me at Origins this year.
Which was great.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I haven't laughed that hard in years. But it really depends on what I want to focus on at that convention, for example. There are times when I just feel like I want to be silly and I want to just goof around with a bunch of people. I'll run Paranoia. If I want some high action and I'm kind of in the mood to run something like that, run Feng Shui. For epic stories, we Star Wars. If I want to do a dungeon crawl, D&D, it really depends on my mood and what I'm in the mood to volunteer for.
What about you, Cinda, as someone who runs a lot more improv heavy games? What goes into your selection process?
Honestly, there's two parts. The first part is, how lazy am I? Do I just want to run something I've run a million times before that I can just do without thinking about it? So that happens. So I end up running a lot of Bubblegum and Lasers and Feelings and One Last Job, because I really don't have to think about them very hard, and they're different every time. So as a GM, I don't get bored. And to me, that's a lot of it is, you know, I get really bored of things when they end up the same way every time. That's part of the reason I really like to run improv games. But I'm also probably less scared than I should be about pulling out new games at a convention that I may not have even ever run before. Especially having podcasted for a while, I'm running things that I haven't run before, like a lot, and I'm usually recording them for other people to hear. So at a Catacon, I'm actually hoping that I can break out Royal Blood, which is Grant Howitt's latest game, and I really like it, and it uses tarot cards, and it's super cool. But I kind of tend to look for things that are going to be different every time, that have really high levels of player involvement, so that I'm not the person at the table who has to drive all of the action and make everything happen and like tell a story, honestly, because that's not what I personally get out of GMing. I really like to have a creative experience with the entire table. So I'm looking for games that will do that for me, that that feel like safe games to play with a table of strangers. So I might not do Soth at a convention, because that could, it could go great. It could go terrible. Like, that's the kind of game I think you play with people that you trust.
Right.
But so I think maybe that answers your question. Does it a little bit? Like, I'm usually looking for games that are light enough in rules that I'm not going to have to look up anything during the game, because it drives me crazy when I do.
Right.
And I'm terrible at really, I played, 3rd edition and 3.5 and Pathfinder for a long time, and I just am not into picking up tomes of rules anymore. I still play in those games, but I don't like to run them.
No, and I think that hits kind of what I was going for. And that really kind of leads me into the next topic, which is kind of going to bridge between prepping and playing, is that for convention games, one, it's not unusual for people to quote unquote bring their A game with props. I don't normally use them at my home games because I'm lazy, but for a convention, I might spend some time and actually make some props or some handouts. I also almost always bring pre-gens for the games, mostly because I want to have at least some idea of what the characters can do. And if you let people bring their own, depending on the game system, Pathfinder is a good example. You may get something that, uses a book you've never heard of, and now you're dealing with powers and abilities you're not comfortable with. So make sure you bring pre-gens, and then just be smart or I guess thoughtful about the pre-gens. Bring a variety of classes and race combinations and genders. Or for mine, usually I just leave the gender off and tell people you can play the male, female, binaries, whatever. I don't care. That's up to you. But I want to make sure that no one feels uncomfortable just because all the pre-gens are dudes or all the pre-gens are girls or whatever. I just think that it's something you may not think about, but when you're dealing with strangers, you don't know who's going to be at your table, and you don't know what might make them uncomfortable or what could set them at ease, which is just providing pre-gens that make sense for them. I don't know if I covered that very well. Anything on that before we move on?
No, that makes pretty good sense. You need to have everything. You don't want to go too crazy as a GM, because that's a lot of work. For example, our GM for our podcast, Chris, he ran games at our last convention too, and I was talking to him, and he's like, "Yeah, I've got 14 PCs, so no matter what somebody wants to play, I've got it covered." And I'm like, "Okay, you're a little more crazy than I am. I came up with like 7 that work really good together. A couple of them are then I've got because if you craft the adventure and you make sure, like I do I have different points, I always try to make sure there's something for each of the pre-gens that I've created. So if there's a giant Wookiee with a vibro axe, I'm going to have people for him to hit. If there's a guy who, talks the banthas out of the trees, he's going to get a chance to do that. If you have 14 or 15 pre-gens, it's really hard to plan for that.
True. Absolutely. I would agree with that. So any last comments on prepping or planning before we move on, or are there any questions that we want to cover here, Kendall?
I haven't had any questions yet. Richard has came up with a couple of good pointers. Apparently, if you're on your iPhone using the YouTube app, they only hear you. They can't hear us. Don't know why. And he pointed out that you sent the tweet with a link to the Google Hangout to the call.
Yes. I did delete that after I realized what I did, so that is totally my fault. Hopefully I deleted it before 1,000 other people got it, which no one else jumped in, so I guess Richard was just quick on the draw.
Yep. Apart from that, the only other thing I would say is when you talk about props, the other thing I do is, especially for systems that are kind of newer or not really mainstream, like D&D, I won't do this. Shadowrun, I kind of won't do this anymore either, although it's helpful. But for Star Wars Feng Shui, I will have cheat sheets for each of the players. Make it easy, have a quick reference sheet for the players so they don't have to be digging through the book. And if I'm really insane and I'm running Paranoia, I have full-on props for everybody. I've got little red squirt guns that are not loaded, by the way, badges and everything so they can really get into the mood of killing each other.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that. And actually, that was one of the things I meant to mention, and I forgot, was cheat sheets. So yes, if you're playing a game that people may be just trying out or learning, and it's rules intensive, then it makes sense to have cheat sheets, either one that's for the entire table or specifically for each character. Like if you have a spellcaster and they have 4 to 5 spells, maybe you need a cheat sheet for spells so you don't have to look them up the entire time. Yep. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll move into the actual process of playing the game. And we'll start with Cinda as our resident expert. So when you actually go to sit down at the table, what do you do? How do you manage that? How is it different from a home game if it is?
So actually the first thing for me happens before I even sit down at the table, which is, and it depends on where you're playing and what style of convention it is. How much of this happens or not. But the first part of doing a one-shot for me a lot of times, because I'm running these games that no one has ever heard of, is I end up standing at my table and collecting players. Like that can happen to me pretty frequently. So there's a start point where it's standing there and making sure that you get a table. And sometimes that's easy. And sometimes it's more and more frequently now I do sell all my tickets. So it's just like, it's hanging out, it's catching people as they come in. And you can set a very good table precedence by how you're greeting people as they come up to your table and how you're basically conversing with them and getting to know them that little bit in the time that you're waiting for the rest of your players before anything ever happens. So I actually treasure that little weird chunk of time before my game starts. It's actually really important, I feel like, to set the table dynamic for how things are going to work. Once I'm past that, I do a couple of things. I usually do play with an X card on the table because I don't know where people are going to go. It is an improv game. I don't know any of these people. And Richard, no, I don't have any specific icebreakers. I'm usually just so bubbly that
it's true.
It either makes everyone really uncomfortable, but then they like relax into it. I don't know. I'm like, I start putting out lots of personality. So, cause I don't want to take up a lot of time, like doing that sort of thing. I do usually play with an X card on the table because safety is important. And I had an incident recently that really reemphasized that for me. So I'm going to start saying that everywhere all the time. Make sure you have some safety mechanisms in place. So I usually talk about that at the beginning of my game. I usually give people a quick rundown about the game, basically the description again, to make sure we're sitting down with all of the same expectations about what kind of play and play style we're looking at. I really like to have everybody, and depending on the game, there's different information on these, right? Like I'll throw out index cards and a Sharpie and we get everybody's names on there so that, we have everybody, and then we'll get character names on there as they're developed depending on the game, or before we start if we have a little bit of character creation at the beginning of the session. So I like having those little cards in front of them, and I usually tell people to write it on the front and the back, because then the person who's next to you can see it too. Because it's great if I can see it, but it's much better if everybody can see it. And I actually, so Michael, to your point earlier about cheat sheets, that is something that I do usually do as prep if it's something that I'm running a lot. So for example, One Last Job, I have a version of it's basically the entirety of the game, but it is all on a single sheet, and it's got the player section and like the GM section, and I use it for reference too. So it's very straightforward, and it means I can run through the rules very quickly. And again, since I'm running games that people haven't usually played before, sometimes they have, but a lot of times they haven't. I do actually usually have to do a quick introduction of at least the basic rules before I start. But part of the reason that I like to pick the games that I pick, as I said before, is because they're not really rules intensive. So I can usually yammer out the basic rules for the systems that I'm running in probably about 5 minutes. I can tell you all out of bubblegum in like 3 sentences, right? So it's very straightforward.
Right.
Lasers and Feelings takes me, a minute, and One Last Job takes me 5. So that's kind of my setup for getting the beginning of something. And then I'm sorry, I've lost track of the rest of the question. You want me to just keep talking? Because I'll just keep talking. Like,
well, I wanted to jump in just for a second to elaborate on a couple of things. One, I also agree with the note card, like the name tents. I'm a big proponent of that. I always ask them to write their character name on the front, and then on the back, I ask them to write everyone else's character names because I want them to refer to each other in character, which also sort of sets the tone that this is a type of game where I really want you to role play. Just in case anyone listening isn't familiar with the X card concept, I'll try to explain it. If I screwed up, either of you can jump in. But essentially, because you're dealing with strangers, you don't know what might make them uncomfortable. You have a mechanism in place called the X card. If someone becomes uncomfortable at any time for any reason, they can either just hold it up. If they have their own, they can touch it. They can in some way gesture that this is a subject I'm not comfortable with, and then the scene's just over. No matter what's happening, it's over. You fade to black. You pick back up with the next scene, and that could be any number of things that are happening in the game: violence, graphic depictions of violence, sexual in nature. And that's the thing about the X card is that you don't know what's going to cause someone. It could be just maybe drug addiction. You have an NPC who's drinking heavily or using drugs, and someone who has a history of that might be enough. So it's a way to make your game table a safe space for everyone. Now, you may not need it. You may not think you need it, but that doesn't mean that the people at your table don't. So at my home game, I know my players well enough to have a pretty good idea of what's going on. But when you're dealing with strangers, I think it's very important. Again, we want to be ambassadors to the hobby. That's one reason why you would run a convention games. You're trying to expose more people to the game and to the hobby in general. And you want to make sure that's just an inclusive and safe place. So if I didn't do justice to that, feel free to jump in.
No, I think you did do justice to it. One other thing that I will say, because I learned this recently, right? Like, because I had a safety fail at my table, and that's part of the reason I really am talking about this a lot right now, is it's not just for a player in distress. In fact, sometimes if someone is in distress, they may lose track of that X card. Or, if you're in the middle of an amygdala hijacking, then you don't always respond logically. If you know another player at that table is in distress, please feel free to use the X card on their behalf and just bring that game to a stop. We can figure out where to pick up and move on. I know that sometimes we talk about things like X cards kind of flippantly. You don't know until it's happened at your table. Like it's worth it to have a plan for how you deal with a safety issue.
All right. So let me I'll cover a couple more points and I'll turn it over to you, Kendall.
And we did have a question, and
sure.
I think it was kind of directed towards you when you're talking about, putting name cards out in front of everybody. Richard wants to know, what about "Hello, my name is" tags? I mean, I'm gonna answer my point of view real quick, and then I'll hand it back to you. Me personally, I despise those things with a holy passion. I think they are an abomination before everybody. So I will do very much what Senda and Michael are saying. I actually have little plastic standees that fit a 3x5 card, and I just put them out for everybody with an empty card before they even get there with a Sharpie. And I say, hey, write your character's name on the front, write your name on the front if you want, but that kind of thing. So I agree with you on that. What do you think about "Hello, my name is" tags?
I don't think it's a bad idea, but it doesn't accomplish everything that I want, because I think it's important for them to know which I guess it does actually. If everyone has that, they can see everyone else's name. So that does fit that. But I also will sometimes use those table tents for initiative. So you can gather them up and put them in a row. So I don't think it's a bad option. It's just not one that I've done. And it's also, I already have note cards in my bag. I would have to go get, "Hello, my name is" stickers. But
always index cards.
Yeah, I mean,
yes,
just you always have them. But no, I don't think that's a bad option.
The one thing to remember, especially in conventions, because I run into this constantly, especially at Origins and the big Gen Con and the bigger media conventions, you're going to have cosplayers at your table. They're not going to want to put a sticky something to their stuff. And exactly, a lot of people, might not be comfortable staring at people and looking at their shirt to go, okay, your name is, why does it say Inigo Montoya on your name? That kind of thing. You're not staring at people. Whereas, everybody's looking at the table, everybody's looking at the dice. It's a safe place, for lack of a better term.
I have kid noise. Sorry.
It's okay.
We can't hear it.
I'm trying to mute.
And you muted.
And you muted, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I'm trying to catch it as it goes. So again, going back to playing the actual game, one of the other things I would mention is I always want to get to the table first. I want to be there early. I have had a couple bad experiences where GMs have come in late. I had one in particular where they forgot their stuff and had to run back to their room. Things happen. I've been to Gen Con, I've been to Origins, yes, but at the same time, I don't want to be that person either, where my table has to wait half an hour for me to run back, and then you're out of breath and you're discombobulated, and it just throws the whole thing off. So I always want to be there early. I want to have all my materials laid out. Like Cinda said, I want to greet the players as they come in, make sure everyone gets to the table, they know what's going on. I do the general icebreakers. I've had some training in facilitating meetings, and there's a reason why you do an icebreaker at all those, because it gets the juices flowing. It gets people used to talking. They learn that this is going to be an interactive thing. And I usually ask them, how long have they been playing? What's their favorite character? What's their favorite game? Just something about the hobby to get them talking. And sometimes you can actually gauge a little bit about how they answer that, what kind of player they're going to be. Because they start talking about their favorite character is the one that does 70 points of damage in 2 turns because of this feat, chain, and this magic item. Okay, you want to kill things. I need to make sure there's things to kill. If someone tells you their favorite character was this time that they broke down and cried because of some story, great, you're a role player. I'm going to give you some meaty scenes to chew on. So that it helps you break the ice. It also helps you gather some information about the players. So be there early. Also have extra pens, paper, and always have note cards with you.
Extra dice too. You never know.
Yep. I always assume that my players are going to show up, and they're going to show up late. They're not going to have anything with them, and they're not going to know anything about the game.
Yep.
So as Michael said, first of all, let me say this. Players, show up 5 to 10 minutes early. I know it's not always possible because you get GMs that run their full 4-hour game, and you want to be there. But if you can, try and be there 5 to 10 minutes early. For the GMs, get there at least 15 minutes early. Find your table. If it's being used, hover nearby. What I usually do is I'll set out the book or whatever, something very visible. Like if I'm running Star Wars, I will set the Star Wars books right up in front of me as I'm getting my stuff all ordered. And when people come up, hey, are you here for the Star Wars game? Are you here for Feng Shui? And that's how I get them into the table. Once everybody's there, I do sort of the same thing. I usually ask them more system-based questions. Have you played this before? Do you know what all these funny dice do? And that kind of gets me the level of, okay, if everybody at the table's played before, I don't want to spend 15 minutes going over the dice mechanics, or in Shadowrun asking if you have a mathematics degree. Trust me, it's like that. But then I can just jump right into things. But if I need to take that first hour, which I usually plan in a con game, the first 30 to 45 minutes is going to be talking about characters, introducing the game, talking about the game system, and teaching the game system before people get into it. So that's kind of how I always look at that. And I always try and target my game to run half hour shy of my time slot, because I know I can pad it or cut it short either way, but that gets people time to, kind of wrap up, get their stuff together. Maybe they'll give you a little feedback at the end of the game, and what they like, what they didn't like that you can incorporate later. And it gets them time to go and get a drink or hit the bathroom before they have to get to the next game. And their next GM will be happy that they show up 5 to 10 minutes early.
Absolutely agree with that. If I have the choice of as a player, my game ending half an hour early or right on time, I will pick half an hour early every time, because again, I schedule terribly at conventions, and I probably have something else starting at exactly that same moment. Yep. And then also and you kind of mentioned, plan a bathroom break. If you're going to be there for 4 hours, don't either set the expectation at the beginning, like, hey, if someone needs to go to the bathroom, we're all adults, just please get up and excuse yourself. Or I usually just plan halfway through the session. I always take a 15-minute break. Everyone goes to the bathroom, gets a drink, gives me a chance to, read my notes if they've gone completely off the wall, and how I'm going to judge my time and everything like that. So that's very important as well. Just the general comfortability, whatever, of everybody at the table.
Agreed.
Comfort. Just comfort.
Exactly. All right. So is there anything else we want to talk about as far as actually playing the game, not dealing with problems yet, but just in the process of running the game at the table? Is there anything else we haven't covered that we think would be important?
I think you guys hit on anything that I missed. Ha ha ha. No. I think we got everything.
I think we're good there.
Okay, well then we will move on to the last section until if there's any questions, we can answer them. But what sort of problems might you run into, other than what we kind of already talked a little bit about, but I guess then how would you deal with them? So if you have a player that's really late, they don't have their stuff, you have an X card issue, you have a problem player, It's just like really loud. There's another table next to you, and they're just really, really loud, and so it's hard to hear. How do you deal with those?
Throw dice at them.
But not your good ones, because you want them back.
Oh God, no! The extra pointy ones you got from Game Science. Actually, I'm going to throw a question. I'm going to throw a question I took from earlier that Senda mentioned something. You mentioned one of the things, and I see this a lot when I'm playing Dungeon World, especially, or running Dungeon World, is you'll come into a room. Hey, player X, what does this bar look like to you? Now, here's the thing. Is that when you, as a GM, usually kind of feel out, okay, I know this person's kind of very creative because of what he's done already, but what happens when you shine the spotlight on somebody and it's somebody that is not a creative person, they're there to roll dice, or they don't want to be in the spotlight? How do you handle that?
It's actually, so there's two parts to that. The first part is when I'm doing that thing at the beginning where we're all sitting down at the table and doing introductions and stuff, I usually actually get a pretty good idea during that first part of who my go-to people are going to be for, like, jump in and do something, at least to set the mode for the table that this is how it's going to work and that we are going to be jumping in and doing things. And the games that I'm running do tend to require that everyone is involved on that level, because it's things like if you play One Last Job, you sit down, you don't have characters, and you have to create the next person's character. And that is the game. Like, that's the first half of the game, is that we build each other's characters at the table. So everyone kind of has to be on board, but there's two parts that I usually find that make that easier. The first part is finding that person as I'm sitting down at the table to begin with and doing those introductions, like that person who's a little bit more outgoing, who is probably a really good go-to for the first thing. And once that person leads off, it's usually easier to get other people involved. But the other thing is that when I ask those questions, I'm always super excited to see what people are going to come up with. A. B, I don't care what you say in that situation. I'm going to tell you it's a fantastic idea. Like, there's a people tend to be shy at the beginning of my games, and then by the end of my games, they're not shy anymore, because we create a space in which it's like fun and exciting to throw out ideas. The third part of that is, if I turn to someone and they just look totally stuck, I will always have a backup idea, right? So it's not me taking back control and being like, oh, you didn't have an idea, so now this is going to happen. It's like, oh, do you have a cool thought? Oh, hey, what if something like this happened? And then it becomes a conversation again in which we're talking about it. And that's another place at which, when someone gets stuck, I'm there to step in and, like, start that conversation and make it into a conversation, instead of just like, ha, you're on the spotlight, you don't have any ideas. Like, and that happens to me too in games. Like, I'm just like, I got nothing, guys, like, help me out. But then the other part of that is that that's a way to bring in the rest of the table and start sourcing some other people who may be a little bit more outspoken too, but it's still that person's, like, moment, and they can still make a final decision. Because usually when I'm turning to a person and asking them a question, honestly, it has something to do with their character. And so they're the final arbiter of whatever happens in that moment or that thing or whatever, because that's their character. So I guess those are the things that I would say is there's a large part that's fostering at the table what in productivity language I would call psychological safety, so that people are part of a team and they're willing to work as a team, and you've created an environment where they can't really mess up, right? Okay. Like, so that's a large part of it, is that if you make that safe space, then I actually usually find that I don't usually get people who are like, no, I don't want to answer a question. Like, instead we get sometimes the answers are more collaborative than others, and it's fine, and it doesn't matter. I'm still gonna, that's an awesome idea, I love the way that you said that, or whatever. I mean, it's a different maybe way of approaching it, but like part of not planning for me is I do work on the assumption that I'm going to source a lot of my material from the table itself. And I will tell you, sometimes that's harder than others. And when it's hard to source the table for that information, that's a harder game for me to run. Like when I have to pull teeth, but it's usually we smooth our way into it. And by the end of the game, we're good. Even when it's a rough table to start. I don't know if that helps at all. Is that kind of?
No, I think that's very good. I mean, one of the biggest problems I've seen is, when you're trying to elicit player buy-in, and you have somebody at the table who just wants to sit there and almost be part of it. He almost wants to not want to be a participant. He wants to be a spectator. We had this at a game at Grand Con. We had a group that was very outgoing, and one guy who was just happy sitting there playing the character who, sat, and he played a character who kind of just sat in the corner and watched everything. And it's like, hey, here's your chance to shine. I do this. Okay, that's great. How does this do this? It's like,
I mean,
I do that.
I mean, you can usually pick those people out, right? Like if they're, as long as you can see like they're still engaged and enjoying the game, then I kind of just don't worry about it, because if they're happy, I'm happy.
Yeah.
It's balancing. If you have like an alpha player who's the kind of person who's really loud at your table and tries to, and kind of accidentally even maybe just takes over the whole table, then you have to be a lot more careful about like, and you, not this person. Like,
yeah,
what are you going to do? Tell me something cool. Like, and there's other ways to do it too. Like, when I run 5-minute RPGs and I just catch people on things, I think, Michael, you experienced this, didn't you? I still need to edit this. So the question that I ask in my 5-minute RPG, which is the one question you get to answer, as a player when you play for 5 minutes, is what is the coolest possible way that you could get out of this situation? And I don't just ask like, what do you do? Right? Because I don't want what do you do? I want like, let's make something awesome. Like, what is the most kung fu crazy movie way that you could get yourself out of this? So there's also, again, there's language involved in how you ask things that you're going to get different responses depending on how you do it. That's also kind of related. I go off on tangents sometimes, you guys. I'm sorry. This is why I edit my podcasts. And now you're watching live and you all know how terrible I am.
I'll still edit the audio version.
Yeah, the audio version will be about 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I wanted to touch on that just a little bit about the drawing out, because that's something that I've done more and more recently. And as a player, I've always enjoyed that. It just never translated into running games. And I actually want to credit Darcy. She was the first GM that I ever really noticed that she was doing that. And this is when we went up to Chicago a couple of years ago for that Demystics game where we played the L5R and everything. And I sat at her table. She was the GM. And again, this is going to sound awful, but she asked someone one of those types of questions and they gave an answer. It was an okay answer. And she's like, oh God, I love that. And she was so excited. And it actually, like, there was a moment I'm like, that really wasn't that great. And then it was like a light bulb, like, oh, okay, I get it. She wants to encourage them to continue to do more. And it just literally was like a light bulb moment for me. It's like, oh, okay. And then I kind of equate it to like a magician, where they'll say, okay, pick a card. And if you pick this card, they go, great, so this one's left. And so they're always going to get the answer they want, no matter really what you say. And I think that's what Cinda was getting at, is if they give you an answer that doesn't really fit, or isn't as good as you wanted, you can always turn that into something, or just frame the question. I know we had a whole episode recently about, or I think I had an article about starting to this process. I said put a box around it. So rather than just saying like what's going on, you ask a question like, there's two men at the bar arguing. What are they arguing about? And that's a very specific type of question. I'm still giving them enough that they should be able to come up with an answer. I can still fill in if they don't, but it's different than you walk into a tavern, what's happening. So I think kind of that's what Cinda was getting at. The way you frame the question can often inform the types of answers that you will get.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I wanted to mention, and then I'll jump over to you guys. I was playing at a con game a couple of years ago, and again, we covered this in one of our episodes. One of the players just wasn't involved. It wasn't like what Kendall was saying, where they were happy to be there, not really participating, but watching. This person just really didn't, I don't even think they wanted to be there. I think it might have been like a boyfriend-girlfriend situation, and one person just didn't really want to be there, but the other person was. I don't know for sure. But the GM kept trying to pull this person in. And considering we had a very limited amount of time, I actually grew frustrated because it was clear they were never going to get involved. Like, they were in the truck. Okay, everyone goes into the house. It's a Scooby-Doo. Everybody goes into the house. I'll stay in the truck. Okay, things are happening in the house. What are you doing? I'm going to stay in the truck. Okay, it's now nighttime. Everyone's going to bed. What do you do? I'll sleep in the truck. okay, I don't need to come back to you anymore until you're willing to jump in. Like if I see you get excited, maybe you start to lean forward like, okay, do you have something? So I guess what I would say is that as you're reading your table, if you have someone that's truly not engaged, I'm going to be okay with you just not being engaged because I don't want to waste time if you're never going to participate when other people want to. And again, I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's how I would actually handle it because I got very frustrated in that game because we had a limited amount of time and we wasted a lot in my mind trying to draw someone out that we never succeeded in doing.
If you're really set a good approach, though, I mean, and I agree that sometimes people just don't want to play. I had a game last year where I was running Feng Shui for the first time. Nobody at the table had played except for one guy, and this girl had brought her boyfriend along, and he wasn't a gamer. And he just didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be there. I could tell he didn't want to be there. And when we broke for the bathroom break, she actually came up and said, you know, I'm really sorry. You know, he's new. You know, he's never been gaming. He's here because of me. And I go, okay, well, I mean, he seemed kind of interested in this. Is that what kind of movies does he like? And by getting just a little bit of information, I kind of tweaked the story a little bit to get him back on board. So he actually kind of found himself wanting to jump back in. So if you have a good rapport, if you do that, like we said in the beginning, if you get a good back and forth in the beginning with your players, sometimes you can get that at the break. You can get a little bit more social time and people will give you information that you can work in.
So I just saw that, how do you think you say that?
Reverus?
Yeah. So, hey, Reverus, my best advice for you in terms of being worried about not being social enough, even though you enjoy the role play and know it's really hard because there are a lot of people, but it's, and this is, I had to grow into this as a GM at conventions too, and I still get nervous, but like, my best tip is to just relax and be yourself because we're all nerds. And I think a Catacon will be a great place to be going for the first time as a convention because it's smaller. And I haven't been there before. I missed last year. I'm going to be there this year. But small conventions tend to be really relaxed, friendly places. Like you be cool and you're going to be fine. Just it's relax.
One of the things I tell people, though, and this is something that I learned way back one of my first big con, I went to Anime Central in Chicago. And I'd only gone to like a couple small, like 100, 200 person con, you know, game days almost. And I went to Anime Central because I was big into anime. And, you know, there's 5,000 people at this convention. And I was like all freaked out and nervous about it. And then by the end of the weekend, I had figured it out. And I described it to a friend of mine this way. Going to a gaming convention or an anime convention is like being around 5,000 of the best people you've never met.
Yeah. When I say we're all friends, I'm not kidding. Like, we're all friends, even if I haven't met you yet. Like, we already have things in common. So,
and no matter how weird you think you might be, there's somebody weirder than you.
Yes.
Take comfort in that, okay?
Yep.
Just believe me, there's somebody weirder than you, and there's somebody who probably is exactly the same weird you are. And that's pretty good odds when you're coming, because that's the idea behind these conventions. We're all coming to game because we're all gamers. We're all nerds.
Yeah. So, hey, if you end up at my table, which I don't have any games on the schedule yet, but Michael, we'll talk about that. Then just know that, I think that this is true of most GMs. Like when you sit down at our table, part of what we're doing beyond telling a story and having a game and everything is really that first part is trying to make sure that everyone feels welcome and comfortable at our table before we start playing. Like that's what that first part of it is. And it usually takes, usually the first 10 to 15 minutes of a game are like a little wobbly while everybody kind of gets accustomed to each other, and that's fine. And everybody expects it, and it's going to be that way. And as a GM, I'm there to make sure that everything keeps moving and pull us through that little rough patch because it's going to smooth out as everyone gets more comfortable with each other and, relaxes.
Yeah, I'm pretty much famous for having no shame.
There's that too.
But even
I don't
myself,
have any shame either.
when I first sat down at a role-playing table, still the first 15 minutes, I'm usually very quiet because I don't have the voice of my character yet. I don't have a feel for the table yet. This is as a player, I mean. And so it takes me a few minutes to warm up to the table as well, and to kind of figure out what my role is. Which player do I need to be at this table? And sometimes that's the quiet player. Sometimes that's the helper. Sometimes that's the alpha player who's leading things and trying to set the tone for role playing. So if someone is a bit shy, and again, I want to clarify my last statement about someone who didn't want to be there. If you're leaning forward and you seem interested in the story, and I can tell that you're interested in what's happening, even if you don't want to actively participate from a role-playing standpoint, that's different. You are absolutely welcome at my table, and I will continue to give you opportunities to be engaged. This person, there was a lot of very physical, I can't say it.
Physical
tells that they were leaning back in their chair. They weren't facing the table. They didn't have the character sheet square in front of them. There was clearly no interest in them to be there at all. Not just I'm kind of shy, or I'm not sure how I want to role play in this situation. Those are very, very different things. And then I do want to flip one more time to the player side. If you are not enjoying a game that you're in for whatever reason, again, if maybe the subject matter doesn't fit you, maybe there's not an X card, or if there is, it doesn't matter, that you thought it was going to be one type of game and it was another, it is okay for you to say, you know what, this isn't the game for me, and leave. Now, I don't want you to have to do that, and as a GM, I want to make sure that you're having fun. But if you're just not going to, then it would probably be better for the people who are there if you just excuse yourself. You don't have to flip the table. You don't have to make a scene to say, hey, this wasn't what I thought it was going to be. You guys have fun. I'm going to take off. Because I had an experience at my first year at Origins. We were playing a 4E game. There were a lot of issues. Again, we covered in the podcast a while ago, but it never even occurred to me to just leave. I was miserable for 4 hours. It was one of the worst experiences of my life from a gaming standpoint. And after the fact, as we were talking about it, people kept saying, well, why didn't you just leave? And again, it was like a light bulb moment, like, oh, I guess I could have done that. It just wasn't even, in my mind that was an option. And I definitely would have been happier going and doing something else. And I'm sure everyone at the table would have been happier without me there. So, it's a win-win in that case. But I want to be clear. I'm not talking about if people are not treating you correctly, if you feel like you're being intimidated. Again,
it's a different story.
It's a different story. And there's a part of me still thinks you might want to leave because if it's an uncomfortable or hostile situation, but I don't want you to have to leave. But again, that's a choice you're going to have to make for yourself, whether, playing the game in an uncomfortable situation is worth it. I'm talking about you just don't want to be there. You had a bad day, you had a bad burrito, whatever the case may be. If you're not going to have fun at that table, it probably would be best for you to leave, because everyone else will probably have more fun if you're not dragging down, if that makes sense.
Nope, that makes perfect sense. I ran into that same thing 2 years ago at Origins. I had a guy who took a popular TV show and wrote up a superhero game about it. And by the time we got to playing it, I realized he didn't know a darn thing about the TV show. He just took the concept, and he was just not in. I mean, the game was just horrible. About halfway through, I said, I got to actually. I did the faux fake. I got to get going. A friend of mine called. Blah blah blah.
Right.
But speaking as a GM, if you're going to be at my table, there's something I require of you, and that's your attention. And the players at the table should have your attention too. If you're going to, and I've told my players at home this, if you're going to sit at the table and you're going to sit there on Facebook and, I'm describing things and everybody else is role playing back and forth and they look at you and you're like, what's going on? And you obviously don't want to be there, by all means, just excuse yourself and leave. We're probably going to do better without you. Again, though, Michael hit a very good point. If you're uncomfortable for a reason, if you feel up to it, bring it up. Otherwise, it is well within your rights and you should leave. So if we got that, you think we got that covered pretty good? We got a question from the bullpen here.
Sure.
I'm going to aim this at Michael. Chris from the Redemption Podcast wants to know, how do you feel, or how well do you feel props go over with players at a convention?
It depends. I don't think a prop can save a bad game. I do think a good prop can elevate a good game to great.
That's a good way to put that.
Can I just say that so at Queen City Conquest, John Arcadian walked in with a full-size, perfectly painted Tarrasque in like a circus
Wait a minute.
cage.
Full size? How did he get it in the building?
Well, no, like to scale, full size, I should say. 1 inch equals 5 feet.
Okay.
But it was, it was a massive thing, and I didn't play that game, but it looked amazing because the game was you're gonna kill a Tarrasque. So.
I will just jump in that John is running that game at the Catacon. If you know,
there you go.
Yeah.
That thing is amazing, you guys. So if you want to kill like the biggest, baddest D&D monster ever, it looks amazing. His wife, I think, did the painting because she's awesome.
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of depends on what the prop is. If it's a map that's been weathered and has a burn hole in it, like that's cool. But it's not really going to add a lot. If there's like an interactive puzzle where there's moving pieces and parts that I as a player get to interact with, that could be a very cool moment. I don't really miniatures. I've kind of got to the point where I don't really enjoy those. Again, a giant Tarrasque is different.
Tarrasque.
Yeah, that might be different. But
it's very impressive.
But kind of what comes to mind is that the most recent Gen Con I played in a game with, and I think, again, I'm tweeted this out, like world-class paper craft minis. It was that Goonies and Ghostbusters game. And those were amazing. They were beautiful to look at. I was so, enthralled and impressed with them. But he also ran a good game. I don't know, like if we didn't have those, I kind of feel like the game might have been just as good. But again, I'm a theater of the mind type of person. But I don't think they hurt the game, if that makes sense. So again, I don't think they make a good game, but they can elevate a good game to a great game. So Kendall?
For what I'll do a lot is, like, especially, I just got done, we finally just finished Curse of Strahd for Ravenloft for my Thursday group. And that's a very spooky game. So whenever there was something, a bit of information or something that, I could have just read the players, I made sure I went into Photoshop, I typed it up, I used a weathered look. If it was something they found, in a pack, Dead Man's Pack, I probably rolled it up, I stomped on it, like dropped it into the bottom of the garbage can, smashed the garbage on top of it a few times. Nothing, not like that bad. I wouldn't go that, but I made it look like they had found it in a grave, but it was still, perfectly acceptable to use at a table. And it set, when they unrolled it, maybe some coffee grounds fell out and it looked like dirt. And it really helped reinforce that. Now, do I do that for most con games? Not usually. Like I said, the one I usually do that for is Paranoia, because people really enjoy the spectacle. And it's a game where you shoot each other in the back. If you have a plastic laser pistol, you're going to shoot people in the back. So it's that much more fun.
So I will say that I feel like a horror game is probably the one type of game where I think they might have a greater effect. I do kind of feel like that might work. I also, if I run a game that I plan on being somewhat spooky, I always try to make sure that game's at night. Like, I don't want to get scared at 12 o'clock on a Sunday. So I don't want to play your, Call of Cthulhu game on 12 o'clock. Now, Friday at 11 p.m. till 1 or 2 a.m., that's a good time to play those types of games.
Yes.
And I'll give credit to the U2 Can Cthulhu group. Again, they came to a Catacon last year, and this year they played in a game where, and again, they kind of go all out, but they actually had lanterns. And they played in a game where you were playing as campers, and that's the only light you had. So there's like 4 lanterns around the table, and that's what you had for your light source. I do think those can really set like an atmosphere differently than just saying, here's the map that you found in the guy's pack, or here's the letter that you found in the bottom of the garbage can. Those are cool, but I don't know. For me, they don't do as much as I think maybe they do for other people. What do you think, Cinda?
I don't know. I have definitely gone very theater of the mind, and I used to do a lot more props, and I used to play with a lot more props, and they're really cool and I like them. But let's be honest, if you're going to use props, you have to plan. You have to have an idea what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like on the fly, I can't just like necessarily turn up the things that are happening at my table. So at this point, I really don't use props.
And actually, that I want to bring up a point. I played another game. I think this was at Origins 2 years ago, maybe Gen Con. I don't remember. But anyway, this guy made his own minis out of Legos. And
Yeah.
they were gorgeous. I mean, he did an amazing job. But near the end of the adventure, it was very clear that we have won, and we should have bypassed the ending. We did a good job. We role played well, good roles, and the DM totally just like railroaded us because he had this mini that he
Right.
wanted to show us,
Then you want to
And
use it. Yeah.
and it
no.
was gorgeous. But when we
Yeah.
set it out, I'm just like, why are we doing?
Why
this?
are we doing this? Yeah.
This is
No.
dumb. Yeah. So again,
Yeah.
if you're going to use them, don't force them.
Yeah. That's where you get into over prepping a game, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a thing. and props create more possibility that you will over prep.
Yeah.
And if you over prep, you tend to get very attached to your timeline, and it's harder to let go and let what happens at the table happen. I know that I'm terrible at it. That's why I don't run those games anymore. Like, I'm awful. I over prep, and then I'm like, no, you will do all the things that I prepped because that is what I said. So now what do? I don't prep at all. Like, I don't run games that I don't know what's going to happen.
I think that's called overcorrection. But
no. It's great.
we talked about problem players, but are there any other issues that might happen in a con game that are fairly common that we might want to talk about? Again, noise is one of them. I don't know that you can do a whole lot about it. I mean, really, I know I usually get hoarse at conventions because I do have to talk louder, to compensate.
Yep.
You can always stand up. I'm a sedentary GM. I like to be behind my screen, but maybe you stand up and you walk around so that way when you're talking like role play scenes, you're next to the person you're role playing, so you don't necessarily have to scream. But other than things like that, what else can you do for noise, or again, any other typical con issues you might have?
I'd almost feel creeped out if you got up and walked around next to me to role play with me.
You should.
I'd be like, yeah, wow. I mean,
Like looming.
I met you.
You would be pulling a Trump, like just hovering over his shoulder.
Where's the X card?
Sorry, Kendall, continue. I
No,
have a
it's
thought,
okay.
but you finish.
I just want to. I do want to make a side note that Riverus pointed out that he feels props can be sometimes distracting to players. Yeah, I can see that too. And again, I think it's a matter of they have to be interesting to make them worthwhile. So I think I'll just leave that subject on that.
Pertinent. Yeah. So one thing that I actually tend to do at my table, and it's partially because of noise, and it's partially because you a lot of times are in a giant room with a certain level of background noise and a certain level of just background activity. I usually stand for a lot of my game to GM, and it does a couple of things. It keeps my energy higher because I'm not just like melting into my chair. I don't walk around, but it means that I have a better angle to be able to lean across the table if I'm having trouble hearing someone. It means that I can be louder to compensate against the background noise. And I think that it also helps in terms of preventing some distraction, because it's easier to, like, I'm more of a focal point, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And so it's an energy thing both for me and at the table, and then it's also like it helps with the projection, and it helps with trying to keep focus on my table despite the level of background activity that is happening all around me. And I don't necessarily stand for the entire game, but I do stand for a lot of it, especially because when I'm a player, I sit. So I'll sit for like 4 hours, and then I'll go run a game. I'll be like, well, I don't want to sit.
Yeah, no.
And I don't do things like I'll put one of my knees on my chair when I'm tired of just like standing, but like I go through a series of positions. So that's one thing that I will say that I find it helps in a lot of ways to just be.
Yeah, especially for noise. There's not a lot you can do about it in conventions. What I tend to do is, especially if I get like the smaller cons, you're not always assigned a table. Sometimes it's just a room. So if I get to a convention room and there's nobody else in there and there's 4 tables and one of them's in the corner, I may switch the signs because I'm a horrible person. But what I like to do is if I put myself in the corner, that means everybody's talking towards me. It makes it easier for me to hear them. And I have no problem projecting, so I will be loud. Also, they're all looking at me in a corner, so there's not distractions behind me. They're more focused on the game that way. There's not a lot you can do about a loud environment other than when, after the convention's over, bring up, with anything having to do with comfort and noise level, bring it up to the convention planners. If they have an RPG, manager or whatever, just say, hey, this is what we ran into. First year we did Grand Con at the hotel here. All our tables literally were 3 feet wide, I think. So like I put my 15-inch laptop down and I had no room at the table because I was sitting at one end. It was like sitting at the end of an I-beam. And we said at the end of it, this sucks. You have to fix it. And the next round, we were also packed probably in like a 20-foot square room. They had 7 or 8 tables. So we were packed elbow to elbow. And the next year we got into the big salons. We had big round tables, and it was much better environment. So those are pretty much your only options.
It's really nice to hear that they've fixed it for you, because what ended up happening, Denver Comic-Con, they used to do RPGs, and instead of fixing their problems, they just don't do them anymore.
Oh.
And I'm like, well, that's too bad. I guess I just won't go anymore.
Right.
Like, because that's kind of what I was going for, guys. But like they ended up moving the tables out to an open atrium area because they didn't want to put them in a room anymore.
Oh my God.
And it was directly under the stage where they were doing the musical acts, and there were no walls. Like you couldn't actually hear the music because it was just echoing around this giant atrium in the Denver Convention Center, but like the noise levels were unmanageable. You couldn't hear.
Well, I will
anything.
pre-apologize because at a Catacon we are going to be asked to elbows in a giant room. But
No. We expect that. It's a small convention. As long as there's not someone doing a show 100 feet above me with no walls, we're good.
Okay. I think
there's one other problem I just thought of. 2 or 3 years ago at Origins, I was running 13th Age, and they parked us right outside the D&D room. And I noticed at certain morning times of the day, the sunlight would perfectly illuminate with a blazing magnifying lens type of intensity our table. Oh my God, that was harsh. Especially since gamers are pretty much nocturnal normally. So I thought a couple of my players, and me included, were about to burst into flames and hiss like vampires. But we ended up the group of us picked up the table, moved it 5 feet to the right, and kept playing.
There you go.
Problem solving.
I actually did think of another possible issue I'll just bring up, and then we'll throw it at the questions, and we'll kind of wrap up. But if you are playing a game that isn't necessarily very improv heavy, like a D&D game or Shadowrun game, what happens if you're in a 4-hour game and hour one of the PCs dies? So you got a player that's sitting there. Do they just sit there for 3 hours? Do you let them bring in another character?
You don't let it happen.
Yeah.
Serious.
That's actually...
You fudge it. Something happens, they're not quite dead. They can, like in Shadowrun, you can actually permanently burn at point of edge to keep your character from dying. You have that option. But for me, especially, what I will do is I will take, I've had so many critical hits take out people in the very first round of the very first combat. And it's like, oh, I just killed your first level character by trampling it with a horse. Now, the first thing that I do is, I'll knock them unconscious. They take a critical hit. They're badly hurt, but I got to give them a chance to get back in. Now, for tournaments, especially if they're elimination tournaments, here's an open secret. We're not going to kill you until it's like the last hour or two of the last night. Then all bets are pretty much off. So
I feel like we're getting dirty secrets here.
Yeah, this is high class stuff now. Top secret.
Yeah. So I played. Actually, this isn't the secret I can tell, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I played in a Shadowrun tournament a couple years ago, where it was the end of the second night. There's only a 2-night tournament. End of the second night, and there was myself and 2 other friends. We played Shadowrun. We play test Shadowrun, so we know the game really well. And we had 3 other people at the table who had never played Shadowrun before. And the GM was just beating us so badly. And just by the luck that we knew how to play a little bit better than the other players, they all got killed. And he was coming after us because the last encounter was basically another Shadowrun team fighting us, which was supposed to be at full strength. We just said, nope, we leave. And the GM's like, what? It's like, we go. We're leaving. We're going to Bermuda. We don't even engage. We run. He just sat there and looked befuddled. And it was an hour and a half left, but we weren't going to just walk into a meat grinder to get killed because it was an elimination tournament. We knew, we'd lose points because we didn't do the last encounter, but we'd be alive.
Right.
Yeah.
So
playing a numbers game. Yeah. All right, Kendall, are there any other questions? And I'll just open it up to any questions. If not, we'll wrap things up.
I don't see any questions. It looks like our our listeners are maybe. Well, Reverus did say Senda answered all of his questions before he can even ask them. So, Senda, what's his next question?
You should have pizza.
Oh, and donuts.
Comfortable shoes. Comfortable shoes.
Yeah.
Water bottle, hand sanitizer.
Hey,
That's a good
girls.
thing.
Pockets. Like, I know that guys don't think about this, but pockets are like super key.
Oh, and I'm going to touch base on that one more time, and then Chris actually had a question. Yes, important things to do at a convention: sleep, eat, drink water, bathe.
Yes. Deodorant.
Yes. Be
Yeah,
clean.
it is a, I don't know, a stereotype, but I've been to enough conventions that there is usually one person in every crowd that does not follow that rule. Please
Mhm.
don't be that person.
Yep.
And you will
Chris-
be happier if you eat and drink.
Yes.
You're going to be more dehydrated than you think you are.
All right. So what was Chris's question?
Chris wants to know, how much do you fudge the dice rolls?
I don't at all, actually. But I also tend to play games that have no player death. Like, how do you kill someone in All Out of Bubblegum? There is no system of hit points. There is no system of damage. There's nothing. You can't kill anybody in Lasers and Feelings. Again, there is no system of damage. Like,
It's true.
Nice.
the only way you can take someone out in one last job is like they have to decide, but they could still just decide to betray their party and then they join you as a GM. Like, so I don't fudge dice rolls at all. But what about you, Kendall?
I will only fudge rolls if it is thematically, like if I think it's going to add to the story or prevent the story from going horribly wrong. If they're fighting their way up to Mount Zoom and they're going to throw this necklace of power into it, and they've fought their way all the way there, and they're at the lip of it, and I got a lucky hit and I just killed the guy who had the ring and now I'm super powerful. I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to hit you. It's going to knock it loose, and I'm going to call for a dexterity check for you to grab onto it. And look, you threw it in with your dying breath. Blam. So I will only do fudge dice rolls really when it's thematically interesting.
So I've been in a couple Twitter fights recently and Facebook forums. I am pro fudging dice, but because I've been having these conversations, I've actually had to go back and really think about it. I don't fudge dice that often. It's not like something I do all of the time, but I'm not opposed to doing it if I feel like it needs to be. And it's not just to save characters, but just in a particular moment. Because I think, again, I'm gonna go on a little bit of a tangent here. I think most people that are anti-fudging think that the DM or GM has a plan for the story. And the fudging is to make sure that plan happens, which is removing agency, which is railroading, which I am not for. So if I fudge a dice, it's not because I decided before the game started that this was going to happen. It's that in that exact moment, as that die is rolling, myself as a storyteller, I think I know better than the dice what would make a good story in that moment.
Agreed.
And it could be because, my monster who's supposed to be a tough fight, they just murderized it and no one took any damage. And yeah, that's cool. So I'm not saying I do that every time, but sometimes I might let my creature go to -2 hit points, give them one round, let them do something, hit somebody, and then they get killed. There's somebody's trying to bluff somebody. And I just think it would be more fun if they got caught. I might say, nope, they passed their check. Or am I thinking it'd be more fun if they fail and they get this totally crazy lie to go over, that their lie was just ridiculous, but for some reason they believe it. Because it's not an art, it's not a computer simulation. It's not, I've written this module, I've read this module, and now it's going to run independently of me. As the DM, I'm entrusted with all this power. Like you trust me to write a good adventure. You trust me to populate challenging encounters and balance them well and give you things to role play and set up all this stuff that I am trusted to do as the GM. Why does that trust disappear when we sit at the table? In a moment, I think I have the right and responsibility to fudge a die if I think it makes the game better. Now, I could be wrong. I'm still a person. Like, as a player, you may think, actually, I would have preferred that I failed that roll instead of passing it. But that's a judgment call that I'm going to make. Just like I decided you'd fight 4 goblins instead of 6, or fight 1 ogre instead of an Etten. I made those choices to try to make the game as fun as possible. And when I fudge a die, it's to make the game as fun as possible. And that's why I'm pro fudging dice.
I'm going to challenge you and say, I feel like everything you just said to me means not that you have a problem with fudging dice, but that you're playing games in which you have to fudge dice to be able to accomplish that. And that you should be playing games in which you don't have to fudge dice in order to accomplish that. But that's just me.
Well, I
this
think
is a different conversation.
I'm sure we'll have at some point. I mean, I just ran Curse of Strahd, and this last week the group finally fought Strahd. It's the penultimate event of 6 months of roleplay, and in one round they almost took him down to nothing before he could even do anything other than charm the cleric, which was me trying to game the system in their favor. Because I'm going to attack the guy with the highest wisdom power so they can feel all cool that they overcome. Wait a minute, why is the cleric now charmed? Oh, crap.
The best laid plans.
Yeah, but they still beat the snot out of him in one round. It's like, okay, this guy is supposed to be... I mean, I've spent 6 months making him this scary, horrible figure. I'm not going to let him go... I ended up taking him to like negative 100% of his hit points because it went 3 rounds instead of 1, and it made the fight more interesting. And then they had to do all this other stuff afterwards. I'm not going to spoil the end of the module for anybody who hasn't played Ravenloft at this point. But that's when I agree with you. When it's thematically and story appropriate, that's when I'm going to kind of bend it.
I feel like my point still stands, but
agreed. But if you're not playing those games, you kind of don't have that option.
No,
it's my group on Thursday. We're going to play 7th Sea, and I'm one of my other players is stepping up to run it. I've been trying to get them to play anything other than D&D and Shadowrun for 5 years now, and we finally got them into playing something else. Yay! And it's like, holy crap! And it's not me running, which makes it even better.
Look! See my shirt. It says Polygamorous.
Nice.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris, for that question. Any more?
We got one more
question. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
If someone needs players, can you join for a couple of hours but leave early because of an event that you are waiting for? Reverus asks.
Absolutely. As long as you tell the GM.
Yeah, I'm like, it may depend on the table and it may depend on the game, but as long as you set that expectation up front and you ask, like, hey, you have an empty seat. I'm looking for something to do for the next 2 hours. How long is your game? Oh, it goes a little bit longer. Is it something that I can play with you for a little bit and then step out of? Like, you can ask that question and just don't be offended if they say no, because it may not be the kind of game that you can do that. But I mean, why not?
Right. But
you don't know till you.
I'm going to make the agreement that no one else knows that. I'm going to kill your character when you tell me you have to leave, and I'm going to make it brutal, and then I'm going to force you to walk away so everyone else thinks it was part of the game. Just rip your character sheet in half, throw it at you. Get off my table.
Get out of here.
One other thing Reverus said that Chris responded to in the chat was that he ran 3 games and fudged a lot of dice himself, but that's because he's a new GM and is bad at making encounters. And Chris pointed out that he's been a GM for a long time. He's still learning how to make encounters. But here's something, and I think Chris actually said this when we ran a panel at GrandCon, a lot like this conversation. No plan, no encounter survives contact with the players. It doesn't matter what you plan for, what your encounter looks like. They're going to do something that you're not going to see. I've been running D&D and other games for years.
I'm sorry, how many was that?
Yeah, I didn't hear that.
I didn't quite catch it.
Was it?
It's older than dirt years. I played the original Nintendo. And players still just completely freak me out. I ran a Star Wars game, and it was set around this idea that they were going to go through Episode 4. And they were going to take, Luke and Obi-Wan and the droids off and everything like that. And there was this the stormtroopers were going to try and arrest them. And the first player goes, all right, I turn around and talk him out of it. And he then presented a perfectly logical reason why he had these droids and that they were not the droids that they were looking for, using complete logic, not the Force, no nothing. And then he rolls like so many triumphs. I had never seen anyone roll that many triumphs before. And I'm just like, all right, you just circumvented the first hour in example combat that I had planned. Good job. Because most players They see stormtroopers, they're going to shoot. Not this guy.
Yep.
So they never survive contact with the players.
Well, and I do think that's a really good point. That I think that new GMs are the ones who are most likely that need to fudge a die because you're not good at building encounters, and you maybe make a mistake and go, oh, they'll fight 4 goblins, that's no problem. But then when you roll initiative, all 4 of your goblins go first, and the first 2 crit. So if you're new and maybe you do build an encounter that's not balanced correctly, or you just have a really good run of luck, I think the fear is that if you're not very experienced, then the reason why you're fudging dice is more because, oh, well, I plan for you to get captured, so you can't kill my goblins because they have to capture you. That's where, in my mind, it moves into a situation that's not what you should do. It's railroady. It's taking away agency from the players. Because I'm actually okay with the railroad. I just want to have agency. If you say you have to fight 4 goblins, cool. As long as I can fight them in any way I want to, including seduce them or trick them or join with them and fight everyone else. As long as you give me the ability to interact with that challenge whatever way I want, I'm okay with being on a railroad from set piece to set piece. But if you're going to fudge a die, if it's 4, okay, I build a bad encounter, my only options are kill everybody, start over, or fudge a couple dice. Or maybe the one in the middle, you just say, hey, guys, players, I really screwed up this encounter. Instead of 4 Ettins, there's 1. And he's got a broken leg. Okay? We all good? And go. You know, you can handle it that way, but that's when I think you should fudge a die, is if you've messed up as a DM and you're trying to fix a mistake, not because you're trying to control the outcome of a story.
Yep, I agree with you 100% on that. And Reverus actually says something that I'm going to address here before Chris had another question. He said, I would love it if the GM brutally killed my character for that reason. It would be awesome. And what I say to you is, at a catacon or any other convention you go at, when you're before the game, when you get up and meet the GM, take him aside and say, hey, if at the end of the game you need to kill somebody brutally, I am totally on board with that. You will watch your GM's eyes light up. He'll be like, yes, I can kill somebody. So
nice.
Except Senda, who doesn't ever kill anybody.
Anybody.
I honestly, it's been a long time since I ran a game. Okay, somebody died in the last convention game that I ran. I'm not gonna lie, but like I play a lot of games that don't have a damage mechanic, so it's great. People relax. They're like, I'm like, don't worry about it. I can't kill you. And they're like, oh really? Oh, I'm gonna do this. Then I'm like, yeah, just go nuts. Like, come on, let's play. It's good.
Yeah. Awesome.
Chris's question is: some players have bad luck rolling dice and seem to fail at checks often. How do you try and keep the players' spirits up?
That is difficult, and I have experienced that myself as a player. And even someone who's played a long time, who's GM'd a lot, and kind of know how things work. I was playing a character, and I just kept failing, and I myself got very sort of frustrated. So my method as a player is I just try not to roll the dice. I go into every game with the idea that I am not going to roll the dice. I'm going to role play myself out of every situation, and I'm going to remove the randomness. And it doesn't always work. You're still going to roll some dice, but I try not to as much as possible. And I think as a GM, and this is something I've talked about before, is how often are you rolling the dice? You know, I think most GMs could roll them less. You know, if your character is even a 3rd level rogue, and they're trying to do something that rogues should be able to do, like climb a wall or break into a house or pickpocket someone, just let them do it. Be like, oh man, you're great at this. You know, you get that one. Unless it's like, you know, a powerful NPC or like a boss monster or something like that. Give them some instant successes. Don't make a big deal of like, I'm not going to make you roll because you're going to fail. Just say, oh no, you know what you're doing. You know, your character can easily do X, Y, or Z. So they still get to be, successful and just kind of bypass the die. That's what I would do. What about you, Cinda? Then we'll go back to Kendall.
Well, I'm the oddball out again, right? So
yeah.
The games in which I play, there's 2 parts to it. Most of the time, pretty much all the games that are run at conventions, when you fail a roll, you fail at that thing, but it usually makes the story cooler, or something else happens. Like if you're playing All Out of Bubblegum and you fail that mundane check, so you don't open the door or whatever, sure, but you just got angrier. So you're one step closer to being able to accomplish everything in the most kick-ass way possible. Or like, Lasers and Feelings, you failed that. That's fine. Like you failed it, but it just complicated the game and made the story more interesting. And in fact, as a GM, I love it when people, actually partial successes are my favorite, because then you succeed and I still get to like put something in there, like to sneak something in, like, oh, but this unexpected other thing happened. So I'm a really big fan of partial successes and stuff, and I am as a player as well. And actually, as a player, I don't mind failure, because when you're playing in the kinds of games that deal with things on a scale of partial success or that kind of thing, or like if you're playing Dungeon World or games along those lines, failure is really, I mean, it might hurt your character, but it usually makes the story cooler, and there's usually something in it for you a little bit, like an experience point or whatever. So I don't have problems with that as often. What was I going to say about, yeah, I mean, so like One Last Job, when someone fails at one last job, that's how we create the crazy, awesome backstory that interconnects everyone. Like, that's how we keep getting closer to talking about what was the event, the reason that you don't work with each other anymore. Like, so it's a lot of games that failure isn't necessarily bad. Right. And that's a table culture thing. It's it's creating that social contract at the table that, like, it's okay if you don't roll well, because it means these other cool things happen. So I would say, I think those games just run differently, because I've had that exact experience, Michael. Like, I know exactly what you mean. It's super annoying. I'm like, I'm the damn rogue, and I'm hidden, and I hide every other turn, and I get an extra freaking 66 to my dice pool because I am hidden, and I'm going to sneak attack this bastard. And every time I jump out, I cannot hit him. Like,
Yes.
and just spend the entire encounter doing nothing but, like, okay, fine, I'm gonna go hide again. Like, or can someone please flank him? Like, it's
I
it's
noticed
really annoying.
that we see a lot of, and Chris's question made me think about this. I see a lot of that, especially in the I want to say the D20 games. D&D especially, I've got a player who can't roll for crap most of the times, and he gets so frustrated because he's constantly missing. Of course, then he'll turn around and roll crits all day. So he tends to vacillate from one side to the other. With Star Wars especially, this is why when we first started playing Star Wars, I hated the dice. When I picked them up, I'm like, what the hell is this? This is horrible. And now I want to turn every game into using that system, because even if you fail, there's cool things that can come out of it. You can describe how your failure, it makes the story richer. In our podcast, and this may be a little spoilery, but I think it was like the episode before last, we had a fight where this droid was on our ship trying to break in and kill us. And my character's sitting there trying to push him off with force push, and I couldn't roll to save my life. Constantly, round after round. But we kept on, coming up with ways that, he rips into the ship and starts clamping on, and we use those failures to build a better story. And that's one of the things I love about that, is when you can stop looking at failures and horrible dice rolls as, oh, I didn't do it. Why didn't you do it? What happened because of that? I mean, you didn't not do it. Something happened. It may not have been what you expected. You might not have been successful. Maybe you didn't hit the orc. But what happened? Did you stumble past him, run headfirst into a tree, and the orc's now laughing his ass off and can't attack this round? Who knows? So there's a lot of options there, too. It's just different systems handle it in different ways, and some better than others.
Well, and I think that really goes back to Cinda's one of her original points about choosing the right game for conventions. And I equate it to like going to a casino and gambling. Over the long haul, if you play a winning strategy, you should see success. But in an individual session, you could lose your ass, or you could win big. And especially when a D20 system, which has a very swingy, it doesn't even have a bell curve. It's just a linear line. So yeah, you're going to have those really intense swings. So, playing at a home game where you're going to play every week for months or years, then, one session where you're not rolling well, it's not that big of a deal. If you're playing in a 4-hour game that you're really excited about and you suck the entire time, that's going to have I think, more of an emotional impact, and it's going to affect your mood. So I think that's why there are con games that are games that make more sense for cons. And to your point, Cinda, I have started running Wushu at cons. I run Dread at cons. I'm going to run All Out of Bubblegum at a Catacon because
join me.
well, and here's the funny thing, because again, it's got the Michael twist. I'm trying to find a way that it's bad to get better. So that's why it's called Dark Hero. So there's a negative consequence to losing Bubblegum, even though in the game that makes you better, there's a twist on it to make that something you don't necessarily want to have happen. But anyway, so yeah, I started to play games that are more like that because I think they make a better con experience for me as a player. And as a GM, I enjoy those more. Still love D&D. It's still my favorite game. It will always be my favorite game. But I don't know that's my favorite convention game because I don't even play at conventions anymore. Very rarely. I go to conventions to play other games than D&D. Now, if I have a hole in my schedule and there's a D&D game, sure. But I don't go to conventions to play D&D anymore. It's always something else I want to do. Cool. All right. Any other questions?
It looks like we have one more question.
Cool.
Also from Chris. He says, I run a lot of non-railroady games, but had a table full of players that could not handle an open game. How do you get these players more involved?
We kind of talked a little bit about that earlier.
Yeah.
In that, you ask the questions and you try to draw them out, and no matter how good or bad their answer is, it's the best thing you've ever heard. Like, oh, that's so great. Yes, I love that.
Yeah, love it.
And you kind of draw them out. Maybe let them group think. Like if, like, what do you guys want to do? Again, I try to put a box around things and give them a very specific question. Like, why are these two guys fighting? Not what's happening in the tavern.
Why did you get kicked out of this tavern the last time you were here?
Yeah. Why are you walking? You're supposed to have horses.
Yeah.
And maybe you just get a table that doesn't want to do that. And you just go into, I've ran games for years. All right, rails it is. Here we go. Yep. 4 goblins. What are we doing?
Yeah, it's a lot more effort.
What about you, Kendall? What would you do in that situation? You run in a high improv game and you have low improv players.
I would drop back 7 and punt.
I can say one more thing about it, or you can go.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I'm like, here's the other thing that I would say about it is it goes back to setting expectations. And part of that is having a good description of your game so that when people are signing up, they know what they're signing up for. And that goes a long way towards making sure that people know that when you walk up to my game and you're sitting down and it's one last job.
So in your description, there's a link to an actual play. So
right,
people have to required homework. Listen to this.
Listen to this. No, because that would give away things. But I do tend to say things like, come ready to improv or something like that. Like, we're going to save the world one last time because this terrible thing is happening. Can they do it? We're going to find out together. Come ready to improv and have fun or whatever. Like, I'll put a little line like that in my game descriptions so that we are clear. Like, there's no rails here. If you're signing up for this game, you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, like many things, setting expectations early solves problems before they happen.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm letting you guys mostly talk because, Chris sees me every week, so he can ask me questions whenever he wants. So...
Well, I don't see any other questions in our chat, Michael. If you want to wrap us up.
Okay. Well, first of all, Cinda, Kendall, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate you guys bringing your expertise. And to any of those listening currently or in the future, this is something we want to continue to do. We have a wealth and breadth of knowledge on the RPG Academy network, and we want to try to start cross-pollinating and getting some different people together for different topics. So this was done specifically because Petter asked us to. He's like, hey, I'm going to run convention games. How do I do that? So if you have things that you would like to see us discuss, please let us know. We will try to organize this in the future.
Yeah.
So wait, what?
No, I agreed with you.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
you're not used to that, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're supposed to tell me I'm wrong and insult me like Caleb.
You're wrong. We hate everyone. We're not going to talk about anything.
Awesome. All right. So Kendall, if you want to kind of reintroduce yourself, where people can find you on the internet, listen to your show or get a hold of you, and then we'll sign off after we all do that.
Yep. Thanks for having me on. You can find basically on Twitter at Redemption Pod is our main Twitter. RedemptionPodcast.com is our URL, and Facebook/Redemption Pod. Darn it! I never go to our Facebook. It's always right there when I log on. It's on my homepage. Yeah. Oh my God, this is embarrassing. I don't know my own Facebook URL anymore. Okay, but still, you can find us. Everything's linked off redemptionpodcast.com, so you can go there. You can find our iTunes link and all that good stuff. We are in the middle of season 2, and after a year, we're still going strong. So thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining me. Cinda.
You can find me on Twitter at IDELLAMITHLYNND. I know that it's really long.
M-O-U-S-E.
It's really long, you guys. So that I have to say it. I always have to spell it. It's Idella Mifflin, and yes, it was a name generator. And I do spend a lot of time on Twitter. You can find She's a Super Geek at SassGeek Podcast on Twitter, and you can also find us all over the social media, wherever. Links to the rest of that social media is all on sassgeek.com. Yeah, and you can find me on Gnome Stew, and you can find me on the Misdirected Network on Pandas Talking Games.
Everywhere.
And I think that's everything. I mean, I could list more things that I've just recently been on, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, we'll all be at a Catacon.
Yes.
And we're all going to be at a Catacon. And
Catacon.
Catacon.
Like, guys, I'm flying in. Like, it's kind of a thing. Like, I'm going to actually, like, go. Like, I'm flying across the country to be at a Catacon, which is cool. So
you can come play in our games and be like, you're not doing any of the things you said you would do.
Yeah, geez, Michael, this is really a bad game. Why would you do that?
Awful. Quit fudging the dice.
Why are we playing Dungeons and Dragons?
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both very much for being here. Thank you to all those that are watching live and listening, and again, listening in the future. My name is Michael. I am the co-host of the RPG Academy podcast and the flagship program of the RPG Academy Network. So please go to our site and look on the right. There's a link to all the shows and sites that are part of the network. They're all awesome, and they're all worth checking out. And we'll see you at a Catacon. So for Kendall and Cinda, this is Michael, and we will see you next time.
Good night.
Good night.